Okay, I'm going to start off and maybe wander a little bit. Before we begin, I pulled on this first slide just some various images from the city, and the major departments have some slides represented there. Two comments. First of all, I dug deep into the archives, and so I'm going to point out this slide right here, the police department at a news conference. And does anybody know what that news conference was about by looking at that slide? Okay, Justin. Oh, you raising your hand? At a very opportune time for me. So tell me about that slide if you know it. Yeah, so a long time ago, but that was the press conference. We've got a younger looking Chief O'Neill there, but he's there. The other thing I'd point out on this is the city's unique from other businesses in that we don't all just do the same thing. A lot of companies will just make widgets or they'll provide one type of service. But if you look at these slides, the services the city provides differ greatly. And so everything from Parks and Rec to police and fire, and the risks associated with those different functions vary greatly, and yet the risk management principles that govern your different areas of work, they're all the same. And you can apply them to all your different fields. So let me jump on. So here we are in supervisor training, and what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about supervising or supervision. We're going to talk about training. We're going to talk about accident ratios and accidents. Then we're going to talk about supervisor liability. Then Megan's going to go and talk to you about workers' compensation issues. She's going to talk to you about some essential forms that you need to fill out so that we can properly investigate incidents and track their occurrence so that we can approve. And then she'll talk to you about some training resources that are available. Okay, so supervisors, you're all supervisors. And because of that, the city shows that they've placed great confidence in you for not only being able to do your job, but also being able to lead and be example to others, and also to teach them. And so a supervisor is a person who leads a team of people to achieve goals set by an organization. When you first started your careers after high school, were there any of you that right off the bat started out and were hired as a supervisor? Usually we aren't. And so usually that's a position that we grow into, and we're selected to become supervisors because we've demonstrated proficiency and ability to lead. And so that's why you're here. You've all shown, and those that have hired you and placed you in that position have great confidence in your ability to lead others in achieving your department or your division goals. Training, we're here to talk about training as well. So training is improving an employee's performance by increasing his or her knowledge so they can improve their skills and become more efficient and safe. I'm going to start off, I don't know, I don't see any coffee drinkers here. Maybe you had your morning jolt to begin with. We're going to start off, we're going to show you some videos, and this will get your blood pumping and get you going.
I'm the sous chef here. With any luck, I should be head chef by next year. I've got this amazing fiance, who I won't be marrying this weekend, because I'm about to be in a terrible accident. But really, I should have cleaned up the grease over there, and they should never put the deep fryer so close.
Somebody help me!
I'm working overtime because I want to take my family on a nice vacation. Soon they get a call telling them I was killed in an accident. But hey, I'm wearing a busted harness here. And the company should have checked those tanks to the...
There's been an accident! Run, get some help! Sergeant Standard, call the ambulance! There's been an accident! Somebody help!
Accident? There's no accident. The company should have replaced that ladder years ago. I knew I shouldn't have reached over like that. And why isn't there a strict policy about two people doing a job like this?
Hey, Jim! You take care of that skid? Yeah.
Oh, 911! We got an accident here!
This was no accident. The company knows it's against code to store that much weight up there. I knew I should have been focused on what I was doing. And it's obvious the supervisor didn't report that broken shelf.
James was with our company for 10 years before this tragic accident.
Accident? What are you talking about? Your company never fully trained me to deal with high voltage wires. And the way they were insulated, it was obvious someone wanted to get home in a hurry. What was I thinking? Not wearing all of my safety equipment.
Congratulations for bearing through that. So let me ask you just a couple questions with regard to that. Following each video, there was a little tagline that was there for those who are watching and weren't too shocked by the content of the video. Do you remember what that tagline was after each video? There really are no accidents, and we're going to talk about that later and how human behavior plays into accidents. The other thing is a lot of those employees that were hurt or deceased talked about they or the company. And I want to know who they were referring to. What's the company if it's not supervisors? And there were a number of them that talked about, if the supervisors had trained me properly. And so none of you want any of those types of things to happen on your watch. And so clearly what you need to do is continue the effective training. And I'm not here to say we've got a bad safety record. We've got a tremendous safety record. And that's because you do a great job in what we do. And we need to be vigilant and continue. Because of the position you're in, you are the most influential risk managers in the city. I may have that title, but I'm not out on the job site working with your employees. I'm not the one that has the expertise in operating a backhoe or a police vehicle or all the different machinery that you have. And so you know those risks, and you know your employees, you know their skill level, and you really, like I said, you're the most influential risk managers that the city has, and we appreciate that. People often ask me what really risk management is, and what do you do? And really, it's I go about and as I look at things and deal with people, I ask really just three simple questions, which you just inherently ask or subconsciously ask every day. And the questions are: what can go wrong? What can we do about it? And then implementing, or what should we do about it? You pick a solution and move forward. And in essence, risk management is like conducting a job hazardous analysis with regard to the tasks he's performed. And so I know as your crews go out on a scene, and before they start a project, they'll often have a tailgate meeting. They'll sit down and they'll say, okay, here's the project for the day, and here's the equipment we're using, and here's the circumstances, the environment we're operating in. And you'll sit and you'll evaluate those risks, and those that need to be addressed with your employees, you'll address. And because you do that so well, we've avoided those terrible instances that we saw there in those beginning slides. So just a little motto. I remember a long time ago, I heard a motto. It's kind of stuck with me, and it says, a successful person is willing to do what an unsuccessful person is not willing to do. And so if you transfer that over into supervisors, a good supervisor is willing to do what an unsuccessful supervisor is not, or is unwilling to do. And so that's what set you apart from others, and that's why they hired you to be supervisors, is because you're willing to take that extra step in your proficiency, and really to take that extra step with regard to your ability to care and train for your employees. I'm going to show a video coming up by a video by Gordon Graham. And what this video does is it helps you identify topics or tasks that your employees are exposed to that cause them the most harm and expose them to the greatest risk. This video runs about 13 minutes, but I think you'll find it valuable. Gordon Graham is a nationally well-known risk manager. He started out as a highway patrolman for California. While working, he went to school and got his law degree, and then kind of specialized in risk management for the California Highway Patrol. Then he gained some national prominence, and now he lectures all over the country talking about risk management. But you'll enjoy this video, and it's really insightful.
So I went out and got me a job at Swenson's Ice Cream. For those of you who have listened to me talk over the last 25 years, that was my first big boy job. Sweeping floors at Swenson's Ice Cream. Started off one Saturday, got hired, worked 10 hours that day. My dad called me at the end of the day, "Where you been, son?" "Dad, I got me a job. I'm sweeping floors at Swenson's Ice Cream." "Come on downstairs, son. Let me show you the best way to sweep a floor." Everything's a system. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's always a better way. There's always a best way. 2 weeks into it, Swenson said, "You're a very diligent young man. I want to make you a scooper today." Oh, scooper. "Let me show you how to scoop ice cream." Truth be known, I'd already been practicing. Yep. And eating the evidence, you know. But he had a system for scooping ice cream. When the customer places an order to withdraw the scooper from the scooper well, the water in the well must be running all the time. Gordy, understood? Yes, sir. Tap it off on a clean cloth. Cloth replaced every 15 minutes. Approach the product the customer desires. Never press down on ice cream. You're pressing out quality. Scoop around, deliver the product, make the change, wash your hands, and then approach the next customer. That was Swenson's system on scooping ice cream. I'll give you a hint, if he caught you deviating from the system. If he caught you waiting on a customer without washing your hands first, you got fired. Not back to sweeper, you got fired. Stop by your local today, walk in. They don't have dedicated sweepers anymore. They got one kid standing behind the counter, they're sweeping floors. You come walking in. "Can I help you?" No. 10 years ago, I'd have the two kids in the truck. "Who in this truck wants an ice cream cone?" "Yay, Daddy, we love ice cream." 10 years later, "Who in this truck wants an ice cream cone?" "You go in first, Dad, because there's a high probability they're going to piss you off, and we won't be eating here anyhow." Whenever I look at something going bad, I ask, were there systems in place? Were they up to date? Were they being implemented? Systems. Systems. This all leads up to this whole concept of making decisions on high consequence, low probability events, or what I like to call high risk, low frequency. Why is this so critical? Why is this so critical to you in the fire service? This is important stuff. Important stuff. And if you're fading in, fading out of the lecture, fade in here for a second. It works. I'll do it this way. I'll do what I want to do. Here's your fire department. Not to scale. Fire department's got all sorts of different divisions and bureaus and units, and every division, bureau, and unit's a series of separate and distinct. Oh, what the hell? Oh, okay, screw with the cop, huh? Don't think I ain't got reciprocity with Arizona DPS. You get out of here. Beep, 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 beep. Whoa, there we go. There's your job description. There's the fire department, there's the unit you're in, there's your job description. And every job description is a series of separate and distinct incidents. Things we do. Things we do. And boy, I'm telling you, your job is complex. This ain't making ice cream where there's 10 things to do, or selling commercial real estate where there's 100 things to do, or working at Nordstrom where there's 1,000 things to do. Your job is complex. Hundreds of thousands of different things that we have to be able to do, that you have to be able to do, all with one singular goal. Whatever you're doing, get it done right. Doing things right. If you're driving a truck, do it right. If you're backing a truck up, do it right. If you're fighting a fire, do it right. If you're giving EMS services, do it right. If you're doing a performance evaluation, do it right, do it right, do it right. When we do things right, ladies and gentlemen, and we throw in a little bit of common sense, we got personnel safety. We throw in a little bit of incident documentation, we got the elimination of liability. We throw in a little bit of dignity and respect, we got customer service. Doing things right's the key. And the good news for you is most of what you do ends up going right. Did you ever think about that? Most of what you do, in spite of the extremely complex nature of your job, you end up doing right. My hat's off to you, ladies and gentlemen. In spite of the complex nature of the job, most of what you do right. There's a reason why. Every one of these incidents that you get involved in can be put into one of these 4 boxes. You know, this is important stuff. This is the classic risk frequency analysis. Risk and frequency. By the end of my little talk here today, I want this prominent in your mind. Some things you do in the fire service are what I call high-risk events. Definition, if they don't go right, the consequences in civil court, personal injury, organizational embarrassment are high. Some of what you do are called low-risk events. Definition, if it goes bad, the consequences are low. Some things you do a lot, high frequency. Some things you do rarely, low frequency. The risk frequency analysis. Firefighters get in trouble for 2 things, folks. Intentional misconduct, that happens, but it's rare. Most of what gets us in trouble, gets you in trouble, are mistakes. Study the consequences. Study the consequences. Mistakes happen. Where do mistakes happen? Very rarely do you end up in trouble on high-frequency events. High-frequency events, things you do all the time, generally don't cause you problems. Why? Because of a wonderful tool known as RPDM, Recognition Prime Decision Making. Recognition Prime Decision Making. And you can read all the books out there that are on neuro-linguistic programming, and my doctor friends out here in the audience hopefully will be able to back me up on this. But there's all sorts of studies about how do we think things through, and a lot of these were done back in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of these studies involve fire departments. And they came up with this concept of RPDM, Recognition Prime Decision Making. Your brain is this massive hard drive loaded with information, billions of gigabytes of data stored in this massive hard drive, and when you get involved in any incident, the brain scans it, beep, 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 looks for a match in the already existing hard drive, finds the match, and automatically directs behavior based on past behavior that ended up with a successful result. That's RPDM. It works. It works. When mistakes occur, folks, they're over here on the low frequency events. And I'm not worried about these, the low risk, low frequency events, because even if they go bad, the consequences are relatively small. Where I get all worked up, folks, where I get all worked up, and where I want you to be getting worked up, as a mom, as a dad, as a chief, as a firefighter, as a union leader, I don't care who you are. Where I want you getting worked up is right here. High risk, low frequency events. High consequence, low probability events. These are the ones that historically and probability-wise have the highest likelihood of ending up downstream in nasty consequences. High risk, low frequency events. It's how JFK Jr. died. Flying at night in the fog with 170 hours of flight time, high risk, low frequency. It's how Boulder PD screwed up the JonBenet Ramsey case. Bad cops? Hell no, those are good cops up there. They got involved in an incident called a child homicide. High risk, low frequency. Who dies fighting wildland fires? Take a look at the numbers, folks. Statistically, probability-wise, you would think that career wildland firefighters, who represent most of the people on the fire ground, would end up being the high numbers. No. It's the municipals, the seasonals, and the volunteers. Bad people? Nope. Good people. Low frequency. Low frequency. And by the way, if the United States Forest Service came to downtown Phoenix to fight a high-rise fire, would they end up getting hurt? Why? Bad people? No, good people. High risk, low frequency. Every place I go, people are bad-mouthing Seattle PD. Every place I go, people are bad-mouthing Seattle. Gordy, is Seattle PD the most screwed up police department in the whole world? No, they're pretty good. Gordy, they butchered the WTO riots. That's because their idiot mayor was not looking at riots through one of these 4 boxes. Riots for Seattle are right here. High risk, low frequency. That's why they got their ass kicked. High risk, low frequency. At the end of the riots, they had this little anorexic anarchist from PETA waving his little PETA flag around. Yeah, we just kicked Seattle PD's ass, and now we're coming to LA in August for the Democratic National Convention, and we're going to kick LAPD's ass too. Riots for LAPD are high risk, but they're also high frequency. They started a dozen in the last 2 years. They know how to do that. It's all risk and frequency. When you get involved in something like this up here, please, I want you to get this chart indelibly imprinted over your left eye, just like this. And when you're playing on the high frequency side, no worries. When you're on the low risk side, no worries. High frequency, no worries. Low risk, no worries. When your eye gets stuck up here, beep, 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 high risk, low frequency, I want the bells of St. Mary going off in your head. This is the incident that's got the highest probability of causing you grief. Why? Because your hard drive is empty, ladies and gentlemen. It's high risk, low frequency. I practice what I preach. I got off an airplane in December back in Denver. Where's my flight to Grand Junction? Sorry, Mr. Graham, all flights to Grand Junction have been canceled. Severe weather in the area. Severe weather, 0 visibility, icing conditions. We see you're a frequent flyer with United. Here's a Hertz rental car voucher. You can drive there. High risk, low frequency. What do I look stupid to you? Hello? My boy and I are buying a new boat. Mrs. Graham doesn't know that right now, so keep it secret. But our dream is to fly up to Washington State next year, go out the Strait of Juan de Fuca in our new boat, make a left-hand turn and come right down the Pacific coast. My boy is 11 years old now. He's already figured it out. Hey, Dad. Yes, son. Driving a boat down the Pacific coast, isn't that one of them high-risk, low-frequency events you speak of? Good for you, son. And it is high risk. It is high risk. Take a look at some of the places on the map, right on the coast. Point Doom, Point Death, Point You're Gonna Die, Point 15,000 boats have sunk here already. Do you feel lucky, punk? Well, do you? Point, if you got this far, you're one lucky SOB. You know, I said, very good, Jakey. That is a high-risk, low-frequency event. But there's two types of high-risk, low-frequency events. The DTs and the NDTs. Time to think it through and no time to think it through. These are the ones that scare the hell out of me, folks. Right here. What I like to call the HR, LF, NDTs. Tasks that are very risky, done very rarely, with no time to think it through. And the bad news for us in public safety in general, and you in the fire service in particular, is that we have a number of these HR, LF, NDTs. High risk, low frequency, no time to think it through. Let me give you some classic risk management, ladies and gentlemen. If you study consequences, these can be identified through a study of consequences. And once these high-risk, low-frequency, non-discretionary time tasks have been identified, they can be addressed through a serious training program. A serious training program that focuses every day on HR, LF, NDTs. Where every day is a training day. What will we do if this happens? What will we do if this happens? High risk, low frequency, non-discretionary time tasks. These scare the hell out of me, folks. The good news for you is most high risk, low frequency tasks have total, absolute, 100% discretionary time. Most of the high-risk, low-frequency events that you will ever get involved in, not all, but most of them, there is time to think them through. Time to think them through. This is the most valuable information I can give you, ladies and gentlemen. You have time on a task, slow down. Slow down. Slow down. I was watching you eat the donuts out in front. I make a study of this. I watch people eating breakfast. Here is the doctor, and you know who you are because I saw your little doctor badge on. Eating a muffin. They pick it up, they look at it, and they put it back. Here's a realtor eating a muffin. They pick it up, they take a bite, they chew it 13 times. You know, here's an engineer eating a muffin. They pick it up, they look at it, they study it, and then they put it back. Here's a cop eating a muffin. Here's a firefighter. And then they pack up 14 more and take back to the station with them. Why are you in such a rush all the time? You know, there's something in your DNA that allows you to take risks that most people find unacceptable. And my hat's off to you. But that same DNA twist says everything needs to be done now. I gotta do it now! I gotta do it now! Here's a hint for you. Slow down. Put away the meth. Get into some heroin. Slow down. Slow down.
So a couple things. Number one, I'm not advocating meth or heroin. That's not appropriate. A couple of things he said, though, that were interesting. He talked about these high risk, low frequency. And one of the examples he gave was wildland firefighters. He talked about where there's been fatalities for wildland firefighters are usually with the temp seasonals and the firefighters that live in municipalities and then get called out to help firefighters. Does that ring true? Tell me about the Draper firefighter that got called out at those California fires a couple months ago. A lot of experience with wildland fires? I don't think so. And so that does ring. Oh, did he? So he had lots. Talks about the high frequency events. So let's review this. Let's review this a little bit. I'm going to go back here, and he talked about these areas right here didn't cause him a lot of concern, and those were those high risk, high frequency. And at first blush, you think, boy, anything you're doing is that dangerous. You think this would be the biggest exposure where you'd have most of your injuries. And he explained why that isn't the case. And he talked about that recognition prime decision making. The one point I'd like to emphasize here is the data is correct. We usually get in trouble when we do things rarely and don't have a lot of experience. But with regard to high risk, high frequency events, you'll have new employees that come along that until they're experienced, these high risk, high frequency events are really high risk, low frequency events. So you need to provide for them training and experience and supervision on the job site so that pretty soon they've got in their hard drive how to identify risk and how to respond to these high risk events. So these ones haven't been a problem. These ones, they're low risk. Because of low risk, they're not worried about the consequences necessarily. This one, low risk, low frequency, is not a problem. So here's where he focuses all his attention and where we really ought to focus our attention with regard to training and protecting our employees. And so he talked about this line can be drawn in half, and he talked about the HR, LF, NDTs, and DTs, and that stands for discretionary time, non-discretionary time. And so when we run across these events, like he said, many times we see them coming up or we have time, and so we have time to plan things and plan our response. So we have discretionary time. And so we can avoid the consequences of those high-risk events. And so like he said, where you get in trouble is when something happens right off the bat and you don't have discretionary time in which to respond. And what was his advice there with regard to these things? How do you avoid or protect your employees from those events? Training. He said train. You got to have an aggressive training program. What's going to happen if? What's going to happen if? And that's what you need to do with your employees, and I think that's what you have done with your employees. Like I said, this is nothing more than just doing a job hazardous analysis at the beginning of your job. And then identifying, well, or even before, and identifying potential risks that may come up. Even before you start, so when they do come up, you've discussed it, you've trained it. And they've got a basis upon which to respond. And so I thought that was an excellent video that shows us not only where our employees face the greatest exposure of harm, but also what to do about it, and that's train. And we've talked about harm, and we've talked about injury. This certainly applies to other liabilities faced by the city, and so you may be in a position where you're not out operating heavy equipment. But much of what you do is technical, and this still applies to you. If you come across something that is complicated or new, or if something goes wrong, there's a high risk to it, those principles that Gordon Graham talked about certainly apply to you as well. What was taglining at the end? Slow down. Slow down. Slow down. And you're really good about that. There's nothing we can't do that we can't take time to do till the morning. I've got a little plaque in my office, and here's what it says. No job is so important and no service so urgent that we cannot take time to perform our work safely. And that's generally true. There may be exceptions with regard to police and fire, but generally everything else, we can stop. We can slow down to make sure things are safe. One of the things the Risk Management Division does is we're responsible for providing all the insurance for all our buildings. And so presently we have about, I think we have 80 different locations we insure, and I think our property values are about $250 million once we added on the Hale Center Theater. If you ask the administration, you said, well, what's the city's one most important asset? They wouldn't point to a building, they'd point to the employees. So you're the city's most important asset, and they want to make sure that you're safe, and they want you to slow down, and they want to make sure that all the employees have a proper training, and that's where you come into play. I want to talk to you about, I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about Herbert Heinrich. So Herbert Heinrich was kind of a pioneer in industrial safety. And during the height of his career, he lived back in kind of the 1920s. And he worked for Travelers Insurance. And one of the things he did there is he was in charge of analyzing accidents and trying to prevent accidents. And so he reviewed over 75,000 injury and illness cases, all trying to figure out what caused them and what we can do to prevent them. And he wrote a book that's well known, Industrial Accident Prevention, a Scientific Approach, back in 1931. And here's what he found. 88% of all accidents result from unsafe acts. And so when we saw those prevent it videos at the start, they said there's no such thing as an accident. Well, they're pretty close. 88% result from things that we do, unsafe acts. 10% result from unsafe machines. 2% of accidents are just kind of unavoidable. And I think that's true. As we evaluate accidents, most accidents that come through our department they're preventable. There are things we could have done differently that would have avoided that accident. We're trying to avoid those incidents so we can improve even better. So the other thing he did is he kind of identified a ratio of accidents. And what he found was for every major injury, there are 30 minor injuries, or accidents that produce minor injuries. And there's 300 accidents that produce no injuries. If you think about that, that probably makes sense. We have a lot more accidents where nothing of significance happens than we do we have major accidents. But the question, as you think about it, is the negligence of these accidents 10 times greater than the negligence of these accidents? There's the negligence of this one accident 300 times more severe, more significant than these accidents? The answer is no. Often the negligence is exactly the same, and what might result in a no injury accident the next time results in a major injury. And so one of the ways to demonstrate this is, a lot of your departments have already done this, but I've got a jar full of jelly beans. And in here I've got 300 yellow jelly beans representing an accident that produces no injuries. Then we've got 30 jelly beans or red jelly beans that equal accidents with minor injuries. And we've got hidden in here is we've got 1 black jelly bean. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a little test here, and for the remaining of the training, I'm going to give these jelly beans to Nathan Schaefer, and he's going to pour these in a bowl. And about every minute, he's going to reach in there without looking, and he's going to pull out a jelly bean, and he's going to record on paper the order in which these get pulled. The order in which doesn't work well. The order in which these get pulled out. And then we're going to see, because what math should tell you is we shouldn't draw a red jelly bean until we've drawn at least 10 to begin with. And then we shouldn't draw this one until after we've taken all the 300 and the 30. And you'll see that accidents don't work that way. And sometimes you can draw a red jelly bean or a black jelly bean very early in the order because accidents, although the negligence of the same accidents, the results can be random. So we're going to turn this over to Nathan while I continue here for just a second. We're going to check back with Nathan here at the end and see what those ratios prove. So let's talk about supervisor liability. You've got these employees that work for you. You've got responsibilities to not only do your job right, but to model the correct behavior for them and also train them to avoid those red and black jelly beans and train them to avoid those low frequency, high risk events that get us so many times in trouble. So what happens to a supervisor when we draw the black jelly bean? So supervisors can be held liable as well in lawsuits. And so here's kind of the theories in which a supervisor could get dragged into and get in trouble. First one's negligent hiring. You probably don't do a lot of hiring where that decision rests solely with you. But there's been lawsuits out there where an employee has been negligent, hurt someone, and as they've gone back and looked at the hiring process, they've seen that the employer was kind of deficient in vetting that employee, who maybe had a terrible background, and yet they hired him anyway. The incident comes to mind recently up between Heber and Park City. There's that dump truck driver that crossed over the road and killed that, I think it was a family, I think it was several people. I think the results show that that person had a chronic problem with DUIs and prior accident history. That's an example of negligent hiring. But what you can get in trouble with is negligent training. If you're the one designed to train or designated to train your employees and you don't, for an accident to happen, you could get dragged in as a defendant because you failed to train your employee. Negligent supervision. You're out there on the job site and yet you're not monitoring what they're doing. And negligent entrustment of equipment or a vehicle. If you know an employee is not fully trained to operate a piece of equipment, and yet you're in a bind and ask them to operate that, you could be held responsible for negligent entrustment. So let me just talk to you a little bit about negligence. Negligence for the Utah courts is defined in what they call jury instructions. And those are instructions that juries use after a trial to help answer questions and determine if someone's at fault. And so here's a model, here's the model jury instruction on negligence. It says you must decide whether, and then you put in the names of the defendant, were negligent. Negligence means that a person did not use reasonable care. We all have a duty to use reasonable care to avoid injuring others. Reasonable care is simply what a reasonably careful person would do in a similar situation. A person may be negligent in acting and in failing to act. And so what happens is if a point came in time where they needed to judge your behavior in the way you did your work or the way you trained an employee, the way you supervised your employee, they'd base your conduct or they'd compare your conduct to someone else who does your job and compare it to a reasonably careful person who does the same thing. And they see if your conduct fell below that. Now, in the purpose of a trial, if things got nasty, you got called into trial, how would they determine if your conduct varied from that of a reasonable person in your position? How do you think they'd establish that with regard to evidence and presenting that to a jury? Yeah, you're going to call an expert witness, and guess what that expert witness is going to be? It's going to be an employee that's retired that has done what you've done for 40 years and has risen to the top of his class, and they're going to pick apart your actions, action by accident, incident by incident, and they're going to see, and he's going to come in and critique that and say, oh, they were way low. They should have done this and that or this, and they're going to do that. And so you're not, even if you have an employee involved in an accident, you're not free from potential liability. And I want to give you a terrible example that happened here locally. Back in 2014, there was a 7-year-old boy up at Cottonwood Heights Recreation District swimming with his father. And I don't know if you've been there at Cottonwood Heights Recreation District, but we took our kids there when they were little. Place during the middle of the summer, place is a madhouse. The pool's packed with people. It's a large pool. There's kids everywhere. There's people everywhere on the deck, and they've got lifeguards spotted around here. I don't have a picture, but if you look at an aerial at Cottonwood Heights, there's a transition from just the normal kind of play area or lap swim area to where it goes in the deep end. It drops from about 5 or 6 feet to 12 feet really rapidly. So pretty soon you can be here on the 5-foot level. You can take 2 steps over and you can be in 7 feet. And so what happens is this little 7-year-old's out playing, he's chasing a ball or he's swimming after something, swims into the deeper area and he goes under. He's pulled from the middle of the pool, which ranges from 6 to 12 feet. Witnesses have conflicting reports on whether the boy jumped or whether he fell. The Cottonwood Heights Fire or Police Department shows up, and after the tragedy, they tell the employees, hey, the lifeguards did a great job in doing what they were trained to do. And yet, after 2 years of litigation, after they brought in experts and they picked every bit of that incident apart, the jury came to a different conclusion. So what happens is the deceased, the boy's parents, file a lawsuit against all these defendants. And guess who all these names are? Lifeguards and supervisors. So they're all dragged in as defendants in this lawsuit, and it's 2 years before you go to trial. And here's a copy of the part of the complaint. And what it really talks about is all these people, all these defendants, at the time of this drowning were acting in the course and scope of their employment. They're performing their duties as lifeguards and center/swimming pool supervisors. And then several paragraphs later, it alleges that these employees were acted recklessly or negligently. So what happens after all is said and done and the case goes to trial? They've got a 5-day trial. They parade on all these witnesses. And in the end, they award this family $5.25 million in judgment. They give each parent $2.25 million for the parent and then $750 to the estate of this drowned boy. And then part of what they did is they compared the part of all the parties. And one of the defendants in the case said, well, it's not fair to just compare our fault. You need to compare the fault of the parent. Where was he? He should have been supervising his child. You don't take a 7-year-old to a pool and just let him run in there without watching him. At the end of the day, when the jury assessed fault based on the evidence they presented, 0 fault for the parent. And so this is a quote from the plaintiff's counsel after the trial. As the evidence was presented, it was clear that the lifeguards in question were victims as well. It's an interesting approach. You'd think you'd hammer the lifeguards. They were the ones that didn't see this boy drowned. But he said the plaintiff doesn't go after the lifeguards per se or the supervisors. He said, well, the lifeguards, they were a victim as well, and that they were so inadequately tested, trained, and managed. We believe the jury saw that this was an institutional failure. What's an institutional failure? Whose responsibility is that? That's supervisors. We believe this was an institutional failure, and we are hopeful that the verdict and the evidence that came in will make clear that the young men, excuse me for the typo, and women were set up to fail. Had they been trained, managed, and coached by the kind of talent that testified as experts for both sides, this never would have happened. So, let's learn from the poor mistakes of others. Let's continue to do what you continue to do so well, and that is perform your job safely, and also train your employees that they can perform their job safety. So let me talk about just an overview, and then I turn some time over to Megan. You're the frontline leaders of the city. You're really the ones responsible for getting the work of the city done and getting it done safely. You're the city's most influential risk managers. I may have that title, and I certainly try to do a good job in what I do. But the day-to-day affairs and those activities out in the field, you're the ones responsible for and make sure they're safe. Train employees like you want your children to be trained. I know as a parent, I've had my kids go through the workforce, and boy, you want them to have good employers, and you want them to be trained well. With regard to you as supervisors, with your new employees, focus on those low-frequency, high-risk tasks. Train, train, train. As I mentioned before, note that to new employees, high-risk, high-frequency tasks are still low frequency for them. Use your discretionary time in performing those low-frequency, high-risk tasks, and then slow down, slow down, slow down. Remember our accident ratios, 300 to 30 to 1, our accident pyramid. Negligence is often the same despite the accident category. Just briefly, I was looking, I've got an accident report right here. It involves the fatality of a 27-year-old woman who was traveling as a passenger in a vehicle, and she was coming north through Automall Drive into the mall. And as they were going through on a green light, a westbound car ran the red light, T-boned their vehicle, and she passed away as a result of the accident. Well, we've had employees that have run red lights. Why was she killed in that accident, yet we didn't cause a fatality in our accident? Well, it's those jelly beans. And the one thing about those jelly beans is the way you avoid that one black jelly bean, how do you avoid that? You slow your consumption of jelly beans. And so those entities that have an accident once a month are less likely to confront that black jelly bean than those innocents have an accident once a day. And so if we really pay attention to the small things, the likelihood of that one black jelly bean coming up is, you reduce that significantly. Negligence is a failure to do what a reasonable person in your same position would do, and perform a job safety analysis before doing high-risk tasks. I think before I turn it over to Megan, I'm just going to report in with Nathan. He's probably been doing this 10, 15 minutes. And so my question, Nathan, to you is, did you draw at least 10 jelly beans in a row before you drew your first red jelly bean?
I haven't drawn a red one yet. They're all yellow.
Okay, we're doing well. You haven't drawn the black one yet either?
Nope.
So we've driven all yellow jelly beans?
How many? 12.
Okay, so we're living lucky. Other demonstrations that happens, that ratio is not the same, and pretty soon you'll see a red one pop up early. You'll see a cluster of a couple red ones, but that can happen, and you can see the point of that is you never know when something negligence happens, you oftentimes don't have control over the consequence. And so be careful on that. Now I'm going to turn the time over to, well, first of all, any questions? Blaine?
Cottonwood Heights appealed that decision, Chase.
Cottonwood Heights, they did appeal it, and while that was in the process of an appeal, well, the reason why they appealed it is they said in Utah there's a statute that calls the Governmental Immunity Act, and what it does is it caps the amount of damages that can be posed on a municipality. And so they came back and they said, the damages you awarded exceed the caps that the state law set in. And the plaintiffs' counsel confronted that, and they came back and they said, no, that only applies if at the time of the accident, the city was performing a core governmental function. And you shouldn't apply that cap on damages for doing the same type of thing that's done in a private sector, like a private swimming pool. And so that is, the Supreme Court has indicated their rule in that direction. And so before that case, before they decided, that case settled for about half that. And rather than litigate it for another, go up on appeal and kick it back down, and rather than litigate it, they decided to settle that. So Megan's going to talk about workers' compensation coverages. We're going to talk about risk management forms, and then we're going to talk about some training resources, and then we'll wrap things up.
Hey, real quick, we're talking about supervisors and hiring, training, supervision, entrustment. The other one's negligent retention. Right?
Yeah, that's correct. Scott thought of one that I left off my list. If you have an employee that just keeps on getting in accidents, and yet we retain them, and you think, man, this employee's been involved in 5 accidents in 5 years. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? We know he's going to get in 5 more accidents. You could get in trouble for negligent retention. So thank you for that for Scott. Okay, we're going to turn the time over to Megan. I can set the phone down. We're going to mic her up a bit, and then she'll...
All right, we'll go ahead and start, mostly so I can get this over with. Chase first told me that I had to present, which was fun, and then I found out there was going to be over 100 people, so that made it better. And now that I have to have a microphone and be videotaped, this day just keeps getting better and better. Okay, so real quick on workers' comp. This is stuff that workers' comp that you need to know as a supervisor. So just a couple of things that helps me when we have an employee who is out on lost time where they're getting wages from the comp fund. These are just some of the things that are important for me to be able to push out to the employees, and with you being supervisors, you might be my first resource of getting out to the employees. So you have an employee who's injured, they're out on workers' comp, so now they're getting lost wages paid to them by the comp fund. Some of the benefits that they have is that if you're hurt on the job, there's no co-pays, there's no deductibles, there's no out-of-pocket expenses, you don't pay for your prescriptions. Also, the wages that you're getting from the comp fund are not taxed, and also has lifetime benefits. So if you have any surgery, you may have some issues down the line, there's still lifetime benefits. And then also if you're released to light duty, so this is the most important thing. If you're hurt, you're released from doing your normal job. So you're not able to be a police officer, you can't be out on the road. If your department can get restricted or light duty for you, you still get your entire wage. It doesn't matter if they have you scanning papers or if they have you shredding things, you still get your same wage. If you're off work completely and you're home, they will only pay you 66 2/3 your wage. That's set by the Labor Commission. The city has no pull on that one. What the city will do is that we can let you compensate your paycheck with either your sick or vacation time to make your paycheck whole. So hopefully that you're not feeling that burden. But that 66 2/3 is set by the Labor Commission. That's a Utah law. The other thing that's a Utah law with the Labor Commission is that the first 3 days that your employee is off work, they have to take as their own sick time. It's just what the rules are that we have to follow. Now, if the employee is off longer than 14 days, the workers' comp fund will go ahead and give you those days back, but they have to take the first days themselves. After that first 3 days is when the workers' comp will start paying your wages. It doesn't matter if you work Monday through Friday and your first 3 days are on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If your doctor's notes say that you can't go back to work until Monday, they will count those 2 days on the weekend as being lost time, even if you wouldn't have normally worked them. So that can get kind of confusing sometimes when people are out on lost time claims. Also, I guess I needed to mention, the other thing is that workers' comp, that is the only employee's remedy for anything against the city. The city can't be, well, Chase is going to come and do it. The city cannot be pulled into a lawsuit from the employee because they were hurt on the job. Their only remedy is the workers' comp.
That may seem unfair, but let me comment briefly about that. Back before the Workers' Compensation Act was passed long ago in the early 1900s, employers could sue their employees for negligence. I'd say employees can sue their employers for negligence. So if something negligent happened and they didn't get these automatic benefits that Megan explained for, they could sue them for negligence. Well, what resulted in is pretty soon it just resulted kind of an unseemly workplace with a lot of antagonism and conflict. And employees were, employers were attacking employees, saying they didn't owe them anything because it was the employees' negligence that caused the problem. Pretty soon, to kind of streamline things and make it fair and better for everybody, they passed this Workers' Compensation Act that said, look, if an employee is injured at work, even if it's his own negligence, or even if the employee was injured by the negligence of another employee, we're going to provide coverage, even though strictly before now we wouldn't have to because these people were negligent themselves. In exchange for that automatic coverage, then they made this recovery the employee's exclusive remedy. So if I, backing out of my car to go to a work meeting, I back into you and I knock you over, even though I'm negligent and I'm on the errand of the city, you can't sue the city for my negligence with regard to your injuries, nor can you sue me as an employee. That workers' compensation coverage is your exclusive remedy, but then you don't get the employee, the city, or the employers pointing at their employees and claiming their negligence and negligent attacking them.
Okay, so let's quickly talk about, you have an employee who gets injured on the job. What do you need to know? So on the first form of this, it's the workers' compensation form. This is the one that's going to be filled out whether they need medical attention or if they don't. This kind of gets a little bit confusing, and sometimes it seems like we're kind of nitpicking on the if they don't need medical attention. But if you look on the top right, it has a box that either has yes, they need medical attention or not at this time. The reason why we have it for the not at this time is because, let me get to here. We will have the supervisor follow-up form that the employee will keep, the supervisor, so your job is going to be responsible for following up with the employee. The way that it's going to work is that 1 week after the injury happens, you're going to follow up with your employee and find out if their symptoms have resolved. If their symptoms are gone, there's no need to do a 2-week follow-up. You can send that form straight to me. I will keep both the injury report form and the supervisor form on file. And then we will keep that. And Wendy and I are actually in the middle of having a file pulled from the state archives to pull a box back of someone who was injured several years ago that's now having issues. So we do keep that. We don't need to know about if you have a paper cut. We don't want to know if you maybe hit your funny bone and it's hurting. We want to know if it's something that's significant enough that it's bothering you. We also want to know if it's something that's not resolving. And then after 2 weeks, if the symptoms have not resolved, then we just say that the employee should go see one of our preferred providers and get medical treatment. The biggest thing is it's important to have this filled out to us sooner than later. So on this workers' comp form, you can say that it has a section there that has the supervisors, when the supervisor was notified, and the date and the time. And your supervisor name of who it was who was notified also has to sign the bottom of the form. The reason why that this is important, because that everything on this form is the exact same questions the Workers' Comp Fund will ask me when I'm filling out your form and filing your claim with them. And so if they see that your injury happened 2 weeks ago and they see that your supervisor was notified late, they're going to go back and want to know everything that's happened since then. Did you go on vacation? Were you out skiing? They'll go back to make sure that whatever caused the injury is linked back to your job and what happened. So it's important to get it done faster. That way it kind of eliminates some of the questions that the comp fund's going to come back and have. Okay, so that's a supervisor form. You also have that in your packet. On the back of the workers' comp form, you have this form that I didn't put in. This form is what you're going to do. It's the request for use of sick, vacation, or other if you're off work. So this is that I was saying, that if you want your paycheck to be supplemented with your sick or vacation time, this is the form that we're going to have filled out. I'm going to get it to payroll. That way they can make sure that you're not missing wages if you are off work past those 3 days. Okay, so we talked about what happens if your employee does not need medical attention in the follow-up forms. So now your employee does need medical attention. If you let me know as soon as possible, it helps me be able to keep track of everybody. The longer that we have an employee who's off work and getting lost wages, the worse it's going to be for the employee, the more that they're going to be out of pocket as far as having to use their sick and vacation time, and the worse that it's hurting our premium with the comp fund. If we can get an employee back to light duty, even if it's just something that, you know, is far away from what they normally do, at least they're getting their normal wages, and we're eliminating that cost for lost time. So let me know as soon as you have one of these. I do have different people from different departments who let me know. I talk to Paul a lot, is my person from Public Works I talk to, so it may not be you who tells me, but as soon as you guys can pass it up the chain, it's going to help. We do have preferred medical providers, and we'll get to that in just a second, depending on how serious the injury is. One of the things is that we have several employees who will get hurt. They will go see their own doctor, and then I find about it after. So they're not going to their medical provider that we're preferring. They're also not letting their supervisor know beforehand, and this makes kind of a headache when we're trying to deal with the workers' comp fund. So if I can know about it before, and if we can get them to go to our provider, which would be Scope, an Instacare, well, okay, we'll go in that order in just a second. I'll explain that one. We did have an employee who was on their way to work. They had gotten called in, so they were driving to work, being paid. They were in an accident. They were injured. They went and saw their own doctor, didn't tell their company or their supervisor about it because they weren't at work. They were just driving in. But because they were on call and because we were being paid for it, then we had to file a comp claim with the comp fund. I've also heard people say that they don't want to file a claim with the comp fund, and with the Labor Commission, it's required. Okay, so we're running short on time, so we'll hurry and skimp through this. This is probably one of the more important things. After they've had medical treatment, we need to know what restrictions were given. Did the doctor say that they could go back to work completely? Did they say that they need to have modified restricted duty, and can we provide that to the employees? Or are they off work completely? And then also, did we get a doctor's note? An employee, even if they're bored of sitting at home, they cannot come back to work without having a doctor's note, or else the liability is on us, and we're violating that. I will stay in close contact with you, with the injured employee, and the comp fund to make sure that they're getting everything resolved. No supervisor form is needed to be filled out if they got medical attention. So these are the medical providers. If the Scope Clinic has appointments open, you can go there. WorkMed, Concentra, if those are both closed, you can go to an IHC Instacare, and you can go to an emergency room. Quickly, this is about our accidents. Some different departments have different accident forms in their supervisor follow-up forms, so if it's not these exact same ones, as long as it's something compared to this. We want your forms to be as detailed as possible. Just having a brief "I backed into something" doesn't really help us, especially in the supervisor form. Sometimes there's some triggers that are leading up to it that we need to know about that could have been prevented. And then also, there used to be a $2,000 threshold where if you were involved in an accident that costs $2,000 minimum, it was an automatic day without pay. We've since revised that to $3,000, and obviously the department has the discretion to make it more depending on your experience or the accident of the employee's record, or on depending on how severe the accident was. So this is the form. I put this in your packet too. This is the form for accidents. This is the one that the supervisor would fill out. Just real quick in your packet too, because I need to touch on this. There's an exposure form, an emergency medical provider or exposure form. If you're exposed to a needle prick, if you've come in contamination with anything on that list, some type of blood-borne pathogen, we need to have this on file, and OSHA can audit us on this. These are kind of the training resources that we have. We're members of the Utah Safety Council. We also have a lot of videos that we can get on Coastal Flicks. We can do in-person and on-demand trainings with workers' comp. And then also if you have any projects that you want Chase and I to work on, we can do that too.